The cathedral glowed under the sunlight, streaming through stained glass windows, with gold patterns casting rainbow hues across the marble floor. Rows of wealthy guests sat draped in flowing silver lace, peach head ties, and sparkling igbata, murmuring softly behind jeweled fans and the occasional phone lens. At the altar, Jonathan Anderson stood tall in a deep emerald green tuxedo with black velvet lapels, his polished shoes tapping impatiently as he checked the sleek platinum timepiece strapped to his wrist. The priest shuffled his pages quietly, waiting. The choir's hum had softened. Then, without warning, Michelle's chief bridesmaid approached him, eyes hesitant, mouth close to his ear. "She's not here," she whispered. "What do you mean?" Jonathan's voice cracked in a low panic. "The last we saw her was just before we lined up to walk in. She said she needed to use the restroom." His heart sank. The guests sat still now, sensing a shift. 30 minutes had passed since that moment. The organist stopped playing. The hush inside the cathedral thickened as a quiet tension swirled among the rows of gold-draped chairs. Jonathan's best man hurried toward the back of the church, then returned shaking his head. No trace of her. The powder room? Empty. Dressing room? Clear. A quiet flurry of movement followed, hushed questions, side glances, rising murmurs. Jonathan clenched his fists, jaw tight, mind spinning. "She wouldn't just leave like that," he muttered as if trying to convince himself. But reality crept in. The whispers turned to buzzing phones. Michelle's bridal train stood like statues in rose-colored gowns, their faces pale. A soft gasp from one guest triggered a chain of shocked expressions as the news traveled. "The bride is gone." Outside, chaos stirred. Paparazzi lenses clicked. Hashtags were forming. And Jonathan, still at the altar, no longer looked like the man who had it all. The mighty Jonathan Anderson, once the center of Lagos high society, now sat slumped in the back seat of his matte black Range Rover, staring blankly out the tinted window. His tie hung loose around his neck, the crisp collar of his forest green tuxedo now creased from tension. He had asked the driver to pull over at a dusty, less-traveled street, far from the church, far from the cameras, far from the whispers of guests and trending hashtags. His bride had disappeared, without warning, without reason, and his calls had all gone unanswered. He leaned back in his seat, one hand running across his jaw, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. But then something jolted his attention. A sudden commotion. A woman's voice, loud and unfiltered, rose above the noise of the street. "Oga shift. You know si say na my turn to load?" she barked at a man blocking the entrance of a nearly full bus. Her arm shot out, pointing directly at the bus like she owned it. "Nami day run this side today. I go scatter your teeth if you try me." She wasn't dressed like anyone Jonathan had ever associated with. A tight orange tank top clung to her frame, tucked into ripped, high-waisted jeans. A rag hung loosely from her shoulder, and her hair was braided in bold cornrows. There was fire in her movements, the way she planted her feet, unafraid. She wasn't just loud, she was commanding, magnetic, raw. The man she confronted tried to shout back, but she shut him down with a single glare and stepped onto the metal footboard of the danfo bus, yelling for passengers. "Ikeja straight. No delay. Enter with your change." Jonathan stared spellbound. She was chaos and control in one body. Who is that?" he murmured, still watching. The driver, without turning, answered, "That's Mamacita. She runs this junction. Bus conductor, sometimes cleans the shops, sometimes settles fight. Nobody bullies anyone when she's around. She's tough." Jonathan's eyes stayed fixed on her. Something in him shifted. He had been left at the altar, mocked in silence, but now, on a gritty street corner, he had just witnessed a different kind of woman. Wild, unapologetic, and braver than the ones draped in designer lace. Jonathan stepped out of the car, his leather shoes crunching against gravel and dust as he slowly made his way toward her. The sun glinted off the sleek finish of his watch, the expensive fabric of his tuxedo clearly out of place among the honking buses and shouting conductors. Mamacita caught sight of him immediately. Her brow arched, and she tightened her grip on the rail of the danfo like she was expecting trouble. "Oga, hold your change," she said, her voice sharp and dismissive. "I know day do big man headache this morning." Her eyes scanned him head to toe, taking in the well-tailored suit, the wristwatch that could pay rent for a year, and the confusion painted on his face. Jonathan lifted both hands slightly, like a man approaching a wild animal he didn't want to scare off. "I'm not here to cause problem. I just want to talk to you," he said, his voice calmer than he expected. Mamacita snorted and shook her head. "Talk? Talk weddin'? Your wife catch you with house girl?" Her tone was teasing, but her posture was firm. She didn't trust men in suits. They brought problems. But Jonathan didn't laugh. He stepped closer, eyes locked on hers, voice low and steady. I want you to be my wife. For a split second, the world around her paused. Buses still moved, people still shouted, but Mamacita stood rooted, staring at him like he had spoken in tongues. Then she blinked, her expression unreadable. You drink brake fluid? She muttered, almost to herself, unsure if she should laugh, slap him, or listen. Mamacita folded her arms tightly across her chest. Lips pressed into a skeptical line as she stared Jonathan down like he'd just fallen from the sky. Her voice cut through the street noise with sharp clarity. So if I follow you now, what and go happen to my hustle? This my junction, this bus. Nah, here I day chop. She tilted her head slightly, gesturing around with a worn-out hand towel slung over her shoulder, her gaze unwavering. You want make I throwy everything just because one fine man way where tux talk say him want marry me? Jonathan didn't flinch. He stepped closer, gently but with intention, his tone still calm but laced with sincerity. After the arrangement you can come back. If you still want to. I'm not here to change who you are, I just know what I saw and I know what I feel. It's not permanent. I'll pay you 30 million naira. Just be my wife, for 6 months. For a moment Mamacita said nothing. She moved away from the bus and sat on a low cement ledge at the corner of the park, one leg bouncing slightly as she stared at the ground, chewing the inside of her cheek. The streets continued to buzz around her, but inside her head, everything had gone quiet. This wasn't a movie. This was real. And now she had to decide what a woman like her was supposed to do when a man like that spoke words like those. As the car rolled smoothly back toward the church, Mamacita sat beside Jonathan, arms folded, her eyes scanning the glitzy cityscape she never thought she'd view from behind the tinted windows of a luxury vehicle. She was still in her orange tank top clinging to her figure, paired with her ripped high-waisted jeans and rubber slippers. The scent of engine oil and metal still clung faintly to her from hours around buses and shouting passengers. Her cornrows remained tightly woven, and a slight smudge of dust stained her cheek. She didn't try to fix it. She wasn't here to impress, at least not for real. Jonathan leaned slightly toward her, voice calm but edged with urgency. Just remember, play your part. That's all I need. Mamacita didn't respond right away. She glanced at him, measuring him once more, then looked back out the window. She wasn't used to being told to act. She was used to controlling chaos, commanding bus parks, and shutting down street fights. But 30 million for 6 months? Even she had to admit, it was a tempting trade. Back at the church, time seemed to freeze as Jonathan stepped out of the car with her beside him. Heads turned instantly. Mamacita looked completely out of place in her street-worn outfit and unbothered expression, but she walked with the same confidence she had when yelling for passengers at Ojota. The wedding planner clutched her clipboard tightly, the pastor fumbled with his Bible, and the few remaining guests stared in disbelief. Jonathan didn't break stride. Pastor, he called firmly, we're ready. This is my bride. A stunned silence spread through the room. But, she's not dressed for a wedding, the pastor stammered, eyes wide. You'll receive double your fee, Jonathan replied without hesitation. Do it now. Mamacita raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She walked to the front with him and stood at the altar like she had been born to be there. Her voice rang out clearly when it was her turn to repeat the vows, firm, unapologetic. And when asked if she would love and cherish him, her answer, delivered with quiet amusement, drew a chuckle from the room. For that amount, I believe I can manage. The pastor blinked. Rings exchanged. A kiss followed. Cameras clicked like firecrackers, and the world, especially the online one, would remember this moment not as a scandal but a spectacle. And as they slid back into the Rolls-Royce, Mamacita exhaled dramatically and muttered, from steering wheel to wedding aisle. Life really does move fast. Just like that, Jonathan said nothing. He kept his eyes fixed on the blurred city lights outside the window as the car approached the high-guarded gates of his Banana Island estate. With a smooth mechanical hum, the gates parted, revealing an expansive property that stretched like a private world of its own, perfect lawns, sculpted hedges, and soft garden lights illuminating the path. The sleek vehicle glided up the driveway and halted before a towering mansion of white marble and glass. Its grand columns reached toward the sky, chandeliers shimmered behind tall windows, and fountains danced gracefully on either side of the entrance. Mamacita's gaze held steady as she took it all in. There was no gasp, no wide-eyed wonder, only a quiet calculation in her eyes. She had seen enough of life's chaos to know when it was dressing itself in wealth. As they stepped out of the car, her rubber soles crunched softly against the fine gravel. Jonathan didn't look at her. He walked ahead with brisk steps, his tux jacket still creased from the day's drama, his posture stiff with control. Inside, the lights glowed with silent opulence. Marble floors beneath their feet, a private elevator nestled into the wall, the air scented faintly with imported lavender. He finally turned to face her at the center of the vast foyer, his expression unreadable, voice low but commanding. From this moment, stick to the rules. No improvisation. You'll stay in the guest wing, second door on the left. If you need anything, inform me directly, do not wander, do not assume. His tone carried no warmth, no trace of invitation. It was an instruction, not a welcome. Mamacita met his gaze calmly, her shoulders squared, lips pressed in a neutral line. She offered no argument, only a slight nod, acknowledging the terms. There was no need to ask why he was doing this. She already understood that in his world, emotions were liabilities and control was currency. And she was here to play her part and leave with her money. Mamacita stood in front of the ornate mirror in the guest room, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar reflection staring back at her. The sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows, illuminating the sharp contrast between her street-worn clothes and the polished opulence of the mansion surrounding her. Her hand brushed against the edge of the vanity, still hesitant, still adjusting. How had she gone from shouting over bus engines and counting crumpled naira notes at the motor park to standing in a place where marble floors gleamed under her bare feet and crystal chandeliers sparkled above her head? 6 months, she reminded herself. 6 months to play the role, take the money and leave. But as she looked into her own eyes, something unspoken shifted. This wasn't about money anymore. This was a battle between identities, who she had been and who she was now pretending to be. And despite the quietness of the room, the weight of that transition pressed down like thunder. Meanwhile, Jonathan reclined on a lounge chair near the edge of his private swimming pool, eyes closed, drink resting untouched on the small glass table beside him. The sound of soft ripples filled the air, until a familiar voice broke the calm. "You actually did it," Susan said, her heels clicking across the stone floor as she approached. "Married a complete stranger. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it." Jonathan opened his eyes, sighing lightly without lifting his head. "It was necessary," he muttered. Susan folded her arms, unconvinced. Before he could say more, Mamacita appeared through the wide patio doors, her steps steady, her gaze focused straight ahead. She stopped near the edge of the pool, eyes locked on Jonathan, voice calm. "I think I need a proper dress. Something that fits this role." Jonathan sat up, startled, momentarily thrown by her sudden assertiveness. He had expected her to follow, not challenge. The woman before him wasn't lost, she was adjusting, calculating. Susan glanced between them, her lips curling into a knowing smile. "She fits you," she said softly. "More than you realize." And in that moment, Jonathan saw it too, not just the fire in Mamacita's eyes, but the way her presence shifted the air. She wasn't merely adapting to his world. She was claiming space in it. The morning breeze drifted through the half-drawn curtains, casting a gentle glow across the guest room. Mamacita lay curled under the sheets, her limbs stretched in careless comfort, her face pressed into the silk pillows as a loud, unbothered snore echoed through the room. The bed, impossibly soft and tempting, had held her captive longer than she intended. She shifted and rolled slightly, half asleep, the warmth cocooning her in a peace she rarely allowed herself. But that peace shattered with the sudden creak of the door. Jonathan stood at the threshold, dressed in a crisp gray shirt tucked into tailored trousers, irritation radiating from every corner of his being. His brows were drawn tightly, his jaw clenched. He had been up since dawn, breakfast set, the table laid for two. At the very least, he expected her to show up and keep the illusion alive, pretend to be his wife, nothing more. Instead, there she was, still sleeping, completely unaware, or worse, unconcerned. Her loud snore grated at him, scratching against his order-driven nature like nails on glass. He didn't want to touch her. He didn't want to raise his voice. But standing there, hearing her snore echo off the walls of his meticulously kept mansion, his patience frayed. Mamacita stirred, slowly blinking her eyes open. Her vision blurred before sharpening on him. "So, this is how you look when you're angry," she mumbled, voice rough with sleep. She sat up, hair a wild halo around her face, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy with rest. "You've never seen a woman sleep before?" she added, stretching lazily. Jonathan's voice snapped with control. "Get freshened up. You have 15 minutes. I don't repeat myself." She narrowed her eyes, her shoulders stiffening. "Excuse me? You don't get to speak to me like that. I don't take orders." Not in my world. No one commands me, not even you. She threw the covers off, her bare feet meeting the cold tile as she rose to her feet. Let me remind you, Jonathan, you came to me because you're perfect bride. What's her name again? Susan? Left you standing at the altar. Jonathan didn't reply, but the muscle in his jaw twitched. He could see that day, her silence, the crowd, the humiliation. Mamacita stepped toward the mirror, brushing her unruly hair from her face with the back of her hand, her reflection bold and unashamed. You picked me. A danfo driver. A woman you thought you could clean up and control. You don't get to shame me for the same world you dragged me from. Her voice was firm, not angry, just factual. I didn't ask for this life. You offered it. I didn't ask for this life. You offered it. Jonathan's eyes narrowed, his tone clipped and unwavering. He took a slow step forward, the tension in the room thickening. I brought you here to fit into a system that already works, not to test its limits. Don't mistake my silence for weakness. This is not your world. It's mine. And in this space, order comes first. The room fell into a heavy silence. They stared at each other, two worlds colliding without a single word more. Mamacita's chest rose with quiet defiance, her gaze unshaken. She didn't flinch. Jonathan didn't move. Finally, he exhaled, turned toward the door, and muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "At the very least, fix your snore. You sound like a generator coughing through fuel shortage." He walked out before her reaction could catch up to his words, leaving Mamacita standing firm, fists clenched, fire in her eyes. The war had only begun. Jonathan sat at the head of the long glass dining table, a half-filled cup of steaming black coffee in front of him. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows, casting reflections across the polished surface. He didn't look up when Mamacita walked in. She wore a plain robe, her hair tied back loosely, her steps casual but unhurried. She took one glance at the pristine setup, porcelain cups, imported butter, a basket of croissants, and let out a quiet exhale. She remained standing, arms crossed. "I don't want coffee," she said. "This is rich man's breakfast. Where I come from, we eat rice. Or yam. Even EBA. Something that holds the stomach." Jonathan didn't respond. He continued sipping his coffee, eyes focused on the file resting beside his plate, unmoved by her complaint. The silence that followed wasn't mutual, it was deliberate. She watched him, waiting for any acknowledgement, but none came. So she sat down, said nothing further, and stared ahead, her arms still folded, her lips sealed. "There's a dinner tonight. Post-wedding. Important people. We'll need to make a statement," he said at last, still not looking at her. "You'll need to look presentable. Susan is already arranging something suitable." She didn't respond. She didn't move. The silence thickened. Jonathan finally looked up, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "Don't you speak?" he asked. When she still didn't answer, he sighed and waved to a staff member. "Tell the chef to prepare something else. Something local. Make it solid." Only then did Mamacita's voice return, calm but edged. "I was quiet because I spoke and you ignored me. I'm not here to beg for basics. If you want a wife for display, try listening like you have one." Her tone wasn't loud, it was controlled. And for the first time that morning, Jonathan actually heard her. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden shimmer across the water as the luxury yacht stood anchored off the coast, its white sails billowing gently in the breeze. Tonight's event was not just a post-wedding dinner, it was the all-white party of the season, strictly by invitation and tailored exclusively for Lagos' most powerful oil magnates, media giants, politicians, and old money families dressed in crisp designer whites, sipping vintage champagne under starlight. The deck had been transformed into a floating haven of opulence. Glass chandeliers suspended above polished wood, rose petals scattered near the railings, violins playing softly in the background. But somewhere in the mansion, tension brewed like a storm. Mamacita stood in the center of the dressing room, her arms folded tight across her chest, a frown drawn deep between her brows as a sheer, cut-out gown shimmered mockingly on the hanger before her. Susan, already exasperated, sat at the vanity table tapping her nails against her phone, eyes scanning the latest fashion blogs for inspiration. "Mamacita, that dress is trending. It's bold, it's couture, it's expected." Mamacita raised a brow, her voice cool. "I'm not interested in bearing my soul, and everything else, to impress men who run oil companies." Susan sighed, spinning in the chair. "Look, I've pulled 6 outfits and 3 of them scream, billionaire wife. At least meet me halfway." But Mamacita didn't budge. "I'm not here to blend into someone's fantasy. I want to breathe, not be wrapped in fishnet." Susan groaned, tossing the tablet aside. You're exhausting. Then she stood, adjusting the strap of her own satin dress, her tone slipping into playful exasperation. Darling, I spend 3 hours watching makeup tutorials before breakfast. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Now let's snatch that face and slay this party before I lose my mind. Mamacita rolled her eyes, her tone dry. I'm not Gen Z. Don't lump me into that category. A reluctant smirk crossed her lips as the makeup artists moved in. There was powder, highlighter, perfectly drawn brows, and lashes that whispered wealth. Susan circled her like a sculptor, smoothing the soft folds of a tailored off-shoulder white gown, elegant, form-fitting but modest. A powerful statement without saying a word. Hours later, the sleek Rolls-Royce pulled up to the dock where the yacht floated like a palace on water. Flashbulbs lit up the night as guests were checked against an embossed invite list, champagne flutes already in hand. When Mamacita stepped onto the boarding ramp, time slowed. Conversations hushed, heads turned, curious eyes locked on the unfamiliar woman beside Jonathan Anderson. Murmurs swept through the crowd. That's her? Where did he find her? She doesn't look like his type. But none dared speak too loud. Her presence was impossible to ignore. She moved with grace sharpened by fire, elegance not born of privilege but forged through survival. Tonight she didn't blend in, she walked in like she belonged without asking for permission. The yacht sparkled under the flood of soft golden lights, guests shimmering in elegant white as if the evening itself had been dipped in luxury. Laughter and classical jazz drifted across the open deck while photographers clicked discreetly, capturing moments worth a fortune. Mamacita, now a vision in a tailored white jumpsuit Susan had insisted on, moved through the crowd with poise that neither flaunted nor begged for attention. Her makeup was subtle but flawless, her hair swept back into a chic twist, and the green gemstone earrings Susan had chosen gave a perfect contrast. No one would have guessed she'd ever shouted bus routes or fought for passenger change. Jonathan watched from across the deck, a glass in hand, his expression unreadable. Even Susan, usually immune to surprise, whispered beneath her breath, "She's blending in too well." The true shock came when Mamacita joined a circle of business tycoons mid-conversation. Tech innovators from Singapore, a Nigerian oil executive and 2 foreign investors. When one casually quizzed her on Lagos infrastructure growth and mobile commerce development, she answered fluently, weaving thoughtful insights with sharp wit. Jonathan's brows lifted. She danced when the rhythm changed, gracefully, confidently, neither overly trained nor awkward. She laughed at the right cues, raised her glass when appropriate, and never once looked overwhelmed. By the end of the night, she wasn't just accepted. She was remembered. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden shimmer across the water as the luxury yacht stood anchored off the coast, its white sails billowing gently in the breeze. Tonight's event was not just a post-wedding dinner, it was the all-white party of the season, strictly by invitation and tailored exclusively for Lagos' most powerful oil magnates, media giants, politicians, and old money families dressed in crisp designer whites, sipping vintage champagne under starlight. The deck had been transformed into a floating haven of opulence. Glass chandeliers suspended above polished wood, rose petals scattered near the railings, violins playing softly in the background. But somewhere in the mansion, tension brewed like a storm. Mamacita stood in the center of the dressing room, her arms folded tight across her chest, a frown drawn deep between her brows as a sheer, cut-out gown shimmered mockingly on the hanger before her. Susan, already exasperated, sat at the vanity table tapping her nails against her phone, eyes scanning the latest fashion blogs for inspiration. "Mamacita, that dress is trending. It's bold, it's couture, it's expected." Mamacita raised a brow, her voice cool. "I'm not interested in bearing my soul, and everything else, to impress men who run oil companies." Susan sighed, spinning in the chair. "Look, I've pulled 6 outfits and 3 of them scream, billionaire wife. At least meet me halfway." But Mamacita didn't budge. "I'm not here to blend into someone's fantasy. I want to breathe, not be wrapped in fishnet." Susan groaned, tossing the tablet aside. "God, you're exhausting." Then she stood, adjusting the strap of her own satin dress, her tone slipping into playful exasperation. "Darling, I spend 3 hours watching makeup tutorials before breakfast. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Now let's snatch that face and slay this party before I lose my mind." Mamacita rolled her eyes, her tone dry. "I'm not Gen Z. Don't lump me into that category." A reluctant smirk crossed her lips as the makeup artists moved in. There was powder, highlighter, perfectly drawn brows, and lashes that whispered wealth. Susan circled her like a sculptor, smoothing the soft folds of a tailored off-shoulder white gown, elegant, form-fitting but modest. A powerful statement without saying a word. Hours later, the sleek Rolls-Royce pulled up to the dock where the yacht floated like a palace on water. Flashbulbs lit up the night as guests were checked against an embossed invite list, champagne flutes already in hand. When Mamacita stepped onto the boarding ramp, time slowed. Conversations hushed, heads turned, curious eyes locked on the unfamiliar woman beside Jonathan Anderson. Murmurs swept through the crowd. That's her? Where did he find her? She doesn't look like his type. But none dared speak too loud. Her presence was impossible to ignore. She moved with grace sharpened by fire, elegance not born of privilege but forged through survival. Tonight she didn't blend in, she walked in like she belonged without asking for permission. The yacht sparkled under the flood of soft golden lights, guests shimmering in elegant white as if the evening itself had been dipped in luxury. Laughter and classical jazz drifted across the open deck while photographers clicked discreetly, capturing moments worth a fortune. Mamacita, now a vision in a tailored white jumpsuit Susan had insisted on, moved through the crowd with poise that neither flaunted nor begged for attention. Her makeup was subtle but flawless, her hair swept back into a chic twist, and the green gemstone earrings Susan had chosen gave a perfect contrast. No one would have guessed she'd ever shouted bus routes or fought for passenger change. Jonathan watched from across the deck, a glass in hand, his expression unreadable. Even Susan, usually immune to surprise, whispered beneath her breath, "She's blending in too well." The true shock came when Mamacita joined a circle of business tycoons mid-conversation. Tech innovators from Singapore, a Nigerian oil executive and 2 foreign investors. When one casually quizzed her on Lagos infrastructure growth and mobile commerce development, she answered fluently, weaving thoughtful insights with sharp wit. Jonathan's brows lifted. She danced when the rhythm changed, gracefully, confidently, neither overly trained nor awkward. She laughed at the right cues, raised her glass when appropriate, and never once looked overwhelmed. By the end of the night, she wasn't just accepted. She was remembered. Across town, in a glass-walled office towering above the city skyline, Jonathan sat at his desk, pen in hand but eyes unfocused. The numbers on the spreadsheet meant little right now. His mind wandered back to the aroma of that fish, to the sound of humming echoing through hallways that had been too silent for too long. He hadn't noticed it at first, the change. How laughter replaced the ticking of his clock. How footsteps echoed with rhythm instead of emptiness. She had brought life into a place that used to feel like a showroom. And now, as the deal ended, he was preparing to return to what he once considered normal, stillness. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft knock of his personal assistant. "Sir, the clients from Singapore are ready for the call." Jonathan blinked, reality snapping back into place. "Right. Let's go," he said, adjusting his tie. But as he turned to face the screen, the memory of Mamacita's voice lingered, defiant yet warm, reminding him that even the most structured deals leave behind something money can't measure. Mamacita stood by the open wardrobe, carefully folding the last of her new clothes. Dresses still crisp, tags still dangling. The room was filled with soft afternoon light, her suitcase half-packed on the bed. She moved with quiet purpose, each fold a step closer to closure. The silence was broken by the faint sound of the front door opening, then closing again. She turned slightly, surprised. Jonathan never returned this early. He walked in without a word, still dressed in his charcoal suit, expression unreadable. Without looking at her, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it gently on the edge of the bed, between a folded blouse and a pair of shoes she had yet to wear. "That's the balance," he said, his voice level. "The agreement is complete." Mamacita paused, her hands still on the fabric, eyes briefly meeting his. But Jonathan didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked out just as quietly as he'd come, like it meant nothing. But as he made his way down the hall, his chest felt heavier than expected. The silence he had once cherished now pressed against him like a closed door. He had done what he came to do. Settled the debt. Fulfilled the deal. And yet, something in him lingered, some unspoken tension he couldn't name. The morning sunlight spilled across the marble floor like a whisper, stretching slowly through the vast space of the Anderson estate. Mamacita stood in the doorway of the guest room, her travel bag already zipped and propped beside her. She was dressed simply, white blouse tucked into high-waisted jeans, her braids pulled back neatly, eyes clear and determined. Jonathan stood at the foot of the staircase, coffee in hand, still in his pajamas but fully awake. His usual sternness was muted by something softer, an expression she couldn't quite place. For a moment neither spoke. The silence was heavy but not hostile. It was filled with everything they weren't saying. "You can stay, you know," Jonathan said finally, voice low, measured but unmistakably sincere. "No one's chasing you out. You've earned the space. You don't have to rush." Mamacita smiled gently, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. "And do what? Lounge in comfort until my fire dies?" Her eyes didn't waver. "I have dreams, Jonathan. Dreams that need discomfort. Staying here too long, I'll forget what I'm made of." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But thank you. For keeping your word. For not trying to change me. For everything." He nodded, stepping forward, setting his cup down. "If you ever need anything, connection, help, funds, you know where to find me." There was no flourish in his tone, no grand emotion. Just truth. "I know," she said. "But I plan to build it my way first." She left before the day could fully begin, slipping away like a quiet ending that left the room emptier than it should have. And while Jonathan climbed back upstairs to the silence he'd once prized, something in the stillness now felt incomplete. Mamacita didn't waste a minute. By the end of the week, her blueprint was already unfolding. She registered her transportation company, Iron Wheel Transit, in her name. The vision had lived in her notebooks for years: clean, reliable commercial buses to reduce city traffic, empower women drivers, and serve everyday Lagosians with dignity. With Jonathan's quiet backing, mostly in opening certain locked government doors, she acquired permits and licensing faster than most could dream. The first bus rolled in within weeks, freshly painted, silver and blue with bold letters across the side that read, "Driven by Purpose." She recruited her team, mostly women from underprivileged backgrounds like herself. Mechanics, drivers, office staff. She trained them, paid them well, and gave them uniforms with pride stitched into every seam. It wasn't just business, it was transformation. Crowds gathered on the day of her launch, phones out, mouths open. "Na woman day run am? You day joke." She even fine join. Reporters covered it, social media lit up, and passengers applauded when she personally flagged off the first trip, standing confidently in her branded blazer, heels clicking across the pavement like a drumbeat of triumph. For years she had dreamt of this moment, when she would be more than a background story, more than a woman surviving. And now she wasn't just surviving. She was building, living, commanding. And somewhere in a quiet penthouse, Jonathan sat by the window, phone buzzing with headlines bearing her name. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just watched the screen and whispered under his breath, "Good." Because he had never wanted to keep her, only to watch her rise. The soft clink of glasses echoed across the elegant rooftop restaurant as the Lagos skyline shimmered in the distance. Mamacita sat opposite Susan, both dressed like royalty in effortlessly classic evening gowns, Mamacita in a flowing emerald green satin dress, her braids swept into a neat bun, while Susan dazzled in a wine-red velvet gown with gold accessories, her curls cascading like waves. Their laughter blended with the gentle rhythm of the live jazz playing nearby, the candlelit table between them carrying the comfort of shared trust and newfound sisterhood. From day one, what began as simple styling sessions had blossomed into something deeper, an unshakable bond between two women who had climbed different ladders but found mutual ground at the top. "I swear I needed this night," Mamacita said, sipping her mocktail with a sigh. "You're the calm I didn't know I needed." Susan smiled warmly, eyes twinkling. "That's what sisters from different mamas are for. And honestly, you've been glowing lately." She paused, then leaned in slightly. "You know, I never told you why Jonathan's bride ran away." Mamacita's brows lifted in curiosity. "You mean Linda? The one who ghosted him on their wedding day?" "The very one," Susan replied, nodding slowly. "She and I weren't close, but we moved in the same social circles. She told me her parents were the ones pushing the marriage. They wanted her to marry into Jonathan's wealth, secure the family legacy or whatever. But she couldn't lie to herself. She said Jonathan was brilliant, disciplined, respected, but he didn't see people, not really. It felt like performance. Polished dinners. Silent judgments. She said he didn't love her, not deeply. And she just couldn't fake forever." Mamacita looked down for a second, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "That makes sense," she murmured. "He has pride thicker than concrete. That ego can fill a room before he enters. But I've seen glimpses of softness too. He listens, sometimes, quietly. He pays attention in ways that don't shout. It's buried, but it's there." Susan grinned from ear to ear, eyes sparkling as she leaned back in her seat with playful drama. "Girl, I think he's falling for you. Mamacita scoffed gently but said nothing, just sipped her drink as the night breeze tousled a few strands of her hair. To be continued.